Welcome to the History Maps podcast. Think about a corporate boardroom in London, filled with accountants, directors, people discussing quarterly dividends.
Right, just standard corporate business.
Exactly. But now realize that the specific private corporation commands a standing, heavily armed military force of 260,000 men.
Which is just a massive number.
It is. That is a private army significantly larger than the military of the British nation itself at that time.
Yeah, it really puts things into perspective.
It does. And today, our mission for this deep dive is tracing the military history of the Indian subcontinent. We were starting from its very earliest defensive settlements all the way up to the pivotal year of 1857 when that exact corporate army was dissolved.
And this examination of pre-colonial Indian warfare it's a special installment in our Southeast Asian history series.
Right, specifically because of the profound maritime and martial overlaps between the Indian subcontinent and Southeast Asian polities.
Absolutely. We are pulling from archaeological analyses of the Indus Valley, ancient Sanskrit texts, military records of the Maratha Navy, and the archives of the British East India Company.
And the conventional narrative often paints military history as a straight, linear progression of technology. But you are going to hear something very different today.
Yeah, we are looking at a history defined by constant, relentless adaptation.
I mean, we are talking about scenarios where massive imperial armies are outmaneuvered by localized guerrilla tactics.
Right, where geography dictates military doctrine and where the line between trade and warfare is just completely erased.
Exactly. It's a continuous crucible of synthesis, really.
It is. Invaders and new technologies consistently pour into the subcontinent, whether it is Central Asian horse archers or iron metallurgy or matchlock gunpowder.
But the local environment forces them to adapt.
Yes. The massive scale of the terrain and the sheer logistical demands force those foreign elements to adapt to India, rather than the other way around.
So we are starting right at the dawn of urbanization. If we want to understand how warfare evolves, we really have to look at how the earliest settlements protected themselves.
Which brings us to the enigma of the Indus Valley Civilization. That spans from 3300 to 1300 BCE.
Right. And when archaeologists excavate major Harappan sites like Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, or Dholavira, they hit these massive fortifications.
The massive is the right word. We are talking about Dholavira having multi-layered stone walls and moats enclosing over 100 hectares.
And Kalibangan has baked brick bastions. But unlike Mesopotamia or Egypt during the same era, there is just a complete void of battle iconography.
Yeah, there are no mass burials indicating combat, no fortified palaces, and no enormous weapon hordes.
So what were they building these walls for?
Well, when military engineers examine the Indus Valley enclosures, they notice the functional architecture does not align with offensive military defense.
Like there are no arrow slits or anything?
Exactly. There are no battlements designed for defenders to fire projectiles down onto an invading army. The consensus indicates these massive walls were dual purpose, but heavily weighted toward environmental survival.
Ah, I see.
Yeah, these structures were highly sophisticated hydraulic engineering projects.
Wait, so they are fighting the climate, not a rival army?
Precisely. I mean, the Indus River system is highly volatile. It is subject to massive monsoon flooding.
And baked bricks hold up better against that.
Right. Baked bricks, unlike sun-dried mud bricks, are highly resistant to water erosion. The walls and moats at Dholavira were designed to manage water supply and control flood surges.
That makes a lot of sense. But what about weapons? They must have found some.
They have found weapons, copper and bronze axes, chisels, spears, and stone sling stones, but they show no standardization or concentration in armories.
So they were just tools?
Yeah, they are multifunctional tools intended for agriculture, clearing brush, and hunting. They are not standardized military equipment issued to a standing army.
But if there is no standing army and no major defensive architecture designed to repel a siege, how does a civilization spanning over 1 million square kilometers survive for centuries?
It is a good question.
I mean, you look at a map of the ancient world, and usually a wealthy, unfortified society is immediately conquered by its neighbors.
Right.
I look at the Indus Valley, and it functions almost like a massive gated community. The walls manage the environment. They perhaps deter minor localized threats or wild animals, but they aren't built to withstand a coordinated, sustained military siege from a rival state.
That gated community comparison really highlights the geographical reality of the subcontinent. During this specific window in history, the Indus Valley was protected by massive natural barriers.
You mean the mountains?
Yeah, the Hindu Kush Mountains to the northwest,
Okay.
the Himalayas to the north, and the Thar Desert to the east.
So nobody could really get to them easily.
Exactly. There simply was not a neighboring state with the logistical capacity to project a massive army across those barriers. Plus, the society prioritized economic integration, trade standardization, and sanitation.
What about the skeletons they found? Didn't some of them show signs of trauma?
They did, but the violence that skeletal analyses from Harappa show appears to be interpersonal, localized violence, rather than organized systemic warfare between state actors.
I see. So the shift from environmental management to actual organized conflict that happens later during the Vedic period.
Right, from roughly 1500 to 500 BCE.
And the focus moves away from the urban trade centers of the Indus and shifts east and south to tribal pastoral conflicts.
These are Indo-Aryan clans fighting over the most critical resources of a pastoral society. Cattle, pasture lands, and river access.
And this is where we see the introduction of a completely different tactical paradigm, right?
Yes. The defining conflict of this era is the Battle of the Ten Kings. That took place around 1400 BCE on the Purusni River.
Which is known today as the Ravi River.
Exactly. The Farada king, Sudas, defeated a confederacy of 10 rival tribes. The Sanskrit texts describe strategic river-crossing maneuvers, which, that is incredibly difficult in an era before standardized bridge building.
Oh, absolutely. To cross a river under hostile fire requires securing a ford, managing the current, and protecting your vanguard.
And Sudas achieved this, securing tribal consolidation in the Punjab region.
But the technological leap that makes this consolidation possible is the chariot, isn't it?
Yes, the chariot.
You already know the Vedic period moved warfare to the pastures, but the tactical leap here is the horse-drawn chariot. It acts as a highly mobile, elevated firing platform.
The chariot is the apex predator of the Bronze Age plains. It operates on a specific set of mechanics.
Right, it's a two-wheeled vehicle.
Yeah, which is much lighter and faster than older, solid-wheeled agricultural carts. It provides stability. And this stability allows an archer, utilizing a composite bow, to deliver devastating volleys of reed arrows tipped with bronze or flint.
Let's focus on that bow for a second, because the composite bow is a piece of highly engineered military technology.
It really is.
It isn't just a bent stick. It is constructed from layers of wood, horn, and sinew glued together. This creates massive tension, allowing the archer to shoot further and with more penetrating power than a simple self-bow.
And because the archer's elevated on the chariot, they can fire over the heads of their own infantry.
It provides a significant mobility and firepower advantage. But we must remember the limitations, right?
Oh, definitely. Chariots require relatively flat, dry terrain. They require an extensive logistical tail to breed, train, and feed the horses.
And horses were not naturally native to the deep Indian interior in large numbers.
No, they often had to be imported from the northwest. And the close combat weapons were still firmly rooted in the Bronze Age. Spears, axes, and clubs.
The transition out of the Bronze Age completely rewrites the rules of engagement, though.
It does. This takes us to the Mahajanapadas era, spanning from 600 to 300 BCE. This is the era of the Iron Age equalizer.
The agricultural surplus from iron tools allows for rapid urbanization in the Gangetic Plain.
Crucially, it allows for the funding of standing armies through systematic taxation.
Because iron is a democratizing force in warfare.
Exactly. Bronze requires copper and tin, which are relatively rare and require long-distance trade networks to acquire.
But iron ore is abundant.
Very abundant, particularly in regions like the Chota Nagpur Plateau near the Kingdom of Magadha. Once a society masters the high-temperature smelting process required for iron, they can mass-produce weapons.
So iron swords and iron-tipped spears completely reduce the primacy of the elite chariot warriors.
Yes. You no longer rely on a small aristocracy of chariot drivers. You can arm tens of thousands of infantrymen.
And that leads to the rise of 16 principalities, with Magadha emerging as the dominant power. Under King Bimbisara, who ruled until around 492 BCE, Magadha begins conquering neighbors like Anga.
Using a massive combined arms approach. The texts estimate his field armies included 80,000 infantry, 8,000 cavalry, and the introduction of a new, devastating tactical element.
The war elephant.
The war elephant. The Eastern kingdoms integrated elephants specifically for shock tactics.
But the mechanics of utilizing a war elephant are highly complex, aren't they?
They are. You are dealing with an animal that weighs several tons. The primary objective is to use their sheer mass to physically disrupt and shatter tightly packed enemy infantry formations.
And horses don't like them either.
Right. Horses, unless specifically and rigorously trained, will naturally shy away from the smell and size of an elephant. Therefore, elephants also serve as an effective anti-cavalry screen.
But the logistics of fielding war elephants are just staggering. You have to capture them wild because breeding them in captivity is inefficient given their long maturation cycle.
True.
You have to train them using specific techniques outlined in treatises like the Gajah Shastra, and you have to feed them.
Oh, the feeding is the hardest part.
An adult elephant requires up to 200 kilograms of forage and hundreds of liters of water every single day.
Yeah, if you have a corps of several hundred elephants, your supply train has to strip the countryside bare just to keep the vanguard moving.
Which is where warfare becomes intrinsically linked to statecraft and bureaucracy.
Exactly. Bimbisara's successor, Ajatashatru, waged a relentless campaign to secure hegemony, particularly his siege of Kosala's capital, Rajagriha.
And he didn't just throw iron-armed infantry at mud-brick walls.
No, he utilized complex siegecraft. The sources specifically mention the use of covered wagons to protect sappers moving to undermine the walls.
Wow. I mean, that is intense.
And the deployment of the Mahashalakantaka, which were heavy catapults.
The introduction of mechanized siege warfare. These catapults, likely traction trebuchets operated by teams of men pulling ropes to hurl heavy stones, require engineering, precision, and a steady supply of ammunition.
To build catapults, to feed 80,000 infantry, and to maintain hundreds of war elephants, you require a highly sophisticated bureaucratic machine. The state exists to feed the army, and the army exists to secure the resources and taxable land for the state.
And once that bureaucratic machine is perfected, you can scale it.
You scale it massively.
And that scaling leads to the Mauryan war machine, dominating from 322 BCE to the year 500. Chandragupta Maurya builds a force that is almost difficult to conceptualize in the ancient world.
The records indicate 600,000 infantry, 30,000 cavalry, and 9,000 war elephants.
Managing a force of that magnitude is entirely an exercise in logistics. You cannot simply march 600,000 men across a subcontinent.
No, they would starve within a week.
Exactly.
Chandragupta relied on the principles outlined in the Arthashastra, which is a comprehensive treatise on statecraft and military strategy. The military was administered by a specific war office comprising 30 officials.
And they were divided into 6 distinct boards. They didn't just have a generic general staff.
Right. They had specialized boards handling naval operations, infantry, cavalry, chariots, and the elephant corps. And crucially, they had an entire board dedicated strictly to transport and commissariats.
So supply chains.
Supply chains.
Yeah.
The commissariat board managed the bullock trains required to transport grain. They managed the foragers who sourced fodder for the horses and elephants. And they managed the mechanics who assembled and maintained the siege engines.
They operated state arsenals that mass-produced standardized iron weapons, ensuring that a spear broken in battle could be immediately replaced by an identical shaft and point from the supply train.
The Arthashastra also details a vast network of espionage. Spies, assassins, and informants were deployed to sow discord, poison water supplies, and execute psychological warfare against an enemy state long before the actual army marched.
That is incredibly meticulous, and this organized war machine was tested against Hellenistic tactics during the Seleucid-Mauryan War from 305 to 303 BCE.
Yes, Chandragupta repelled the invasion of Seleucus the First Nicator, one of Alexander the Great's successors.
He secured the entire Indus Valley and pushed his borders westward into modern-day Afghanistan. And the diplomatic settlement is incredibly telling.
It is. Seleucus ceded massive territory, and in exchange, Chandragupta gave him 500 war elephants.
Wait, 500 elephants?
Yeah, the Hellenistic commanders heavily valued the Indian war elephant. Seleucus recognized that integrating those 500 elephants into his own army would give him a decisive shock cavalry advantage in the ongoing wars of the Diadochi back in the Mediterranean theater.
So the Mauryans leveraged their superior numbers, their logistical depth, and their control of the local terrain to force a highly favorable settlement.
Exactly. But wielding an army of that size has an inevitable horrific cost.
Right. Around 261 BCE, Chandragupta's grandson, Ashoka, launched the Kalinga War to conquer a rebellious eastern region.
And the sources detail a brutally devastating campaign. We are looking at historical estimates of over 100,000 deaths in combat and 150,000 deportations.
The logistics of deporting 150,000 people are just as complex and resource-intensive as fielding an army.
Yes. The sheer scale of the slaughter and the resulting famine completely broke Ashoka's desire for territorial expansion. It initiated a profound pivot in military doctrine.
He shifts his policy from aggressive military victory to Dhamma or conquest by Dharma. He publicly renounces violence in his rock edicts. But he does not disband the military, right?
No, a state cannot disband its military and survive.
Yeah.
The standing army transitioned into a massive deterrent force.
Oh, I
It
see.
was heavily focused on maintaining internal stability, suppressing regional revolts, and projecting state power through infrastructure. The Mauryan military began focusing on building fortified cities, managing road networks, and ensuring the smooth flow of taxation and trade across an empire spanning 5 million square kilometers.
But over centuries, the Mauryan central authority wanes, the empire fragments, and by the time we reach the Gupta era, roughly 320 to 500, the military landscape has shifted again.
It has. The heavy chariots that dominated the Vedic plains become obsolete.
It's sort of like how heavily armored knights eventually became obsolete liabilities. The obsolescence of the chariot is a direct result of foreign interaction, isn't it?
It is. The subcontinent was facing persistent incursions from highly mobile nomadic groups from the northwest, such as the Scythians and later the Hephthalites, or Hunas.
And a chariot is rigid. It requires flat terrain.
Exactly. If the axle breaks on uneven ground, the platform is useless. Nomadic horse archers do not fight pitched battles on flat terrain. They utilize hit-and-run tactics, feigned retreats, and constant mobility.
So the Gupta military adapts by completely abandoning the chariot. They recognize that to fight mobile horse archers, you need mobile cavalry.
They shift their focus to heavy cavalry archers and heavy sword cavalry clad in mail armor.
But that requires significant advances in metallurgy and equine infrastructure, right?
Huge advances. To equip thousands of cavalrymen with iron mail armor requires a massive, sophisticated smelting industry.
And to effectively fire a compound bow from horseback requires deep training.
Right. And the adoption of secure riding technologies, possibly early toe loops or saddle designs that provided stability without a chariot platform.
You can physically see this shift in the military prestige arm. There is numismatic evidence, specifically an 8-gram gold coin issued by the Emperor Chandragupta II.
Yes, the coin depicts the king not sitting on a throne and not driving a chariot.
He is astride a caparisoned horse, holding a bow in his left hand. The horse archer is now the official symbol of imperial power.
And this tactical adaptation works. Around the year 460, the Emperor Skandagupta faced a massive invasion by the Hephthalites.
And he used this newly developed heavy cavalry.
Combined with traditional Indian infantry and elephant screens, Skandagupta successfully repelled the invasion. The shock action of heavily armored cavalry, supported by the firepower of mounted archers, was capable of breaking the nomadic lines.
But prolonged wars drain the imperial treasury.
They always do.
And as the Gupta central authority collapses, the subcontinent fragments into regional powers. From the year 500 to 1200, the focus shifts entirely to regional defensive doctrines and simultaneously the unexpected expansion of Indian military power by sea.
Let's look at the regional resistance first.
Yeah, the northern emperor Harsha attempted to push his military south, but he was decisively stopped at the Narmada River by the Chalukya king Pulakeshin II, around 618.
This engagement perfectly illustrates how geography neutralizes numerical superiority. Harsha brought a massive mobile army designed for operations on the northern Gangetic plains.
But to move south, he had to cross the Narmada River.
Right, and Pulakeshin II utilized riverine defensive warfare.
Wait, how exactly do you defend a river against a larger force? Do you just line up along the entire bank?
Well, no. You do not need to defend the entire river. You only need to heavily fortify the viable fords and crossing points.
Ah, that makes sense.
Pulakeshin leveraged his own infantry, stationed in defensive earthworks along the southern banks, and utilized naval capabilities to harass Harsha's pontoon attempts. By holding the river crossings, Pulakeshin created a bottleneck.
Where Harsha's numerical superiority meant nothing.
Exactly, because only a small fraction of the northern army could engage at any one time. It established the Narmada as a de facto boundary and proved the efficacy of a well-prepared static defense integrated with local geography.
And we see that reliance on static defense taken to its absolute extreme in the Rajput Wars. The Rajput military doctrine was built entirely around massive fortified hill strongholds like Ranthambore and Chittorgarh.
Yes, and they continued to rely heavily on war elephants and massed heavy infantry for their field armies.
The architecture of a Rajput hill fort is designed for ultimate endurance. Chittorgarh, for example, is situated on a high plateau. It utilizes deep rock-cut cisterns to capture and store monsoon rain and massive grain silos.
The walls follow the natural contours of the cliff faces, making traditional siege towers or battering rams completely ineffective.
So a defending garrison could hold out for months or even years, simply waiting for the besieging army to deplete the resources of the surrounding countryside and retreat.
Right. But this static defense mentality created a severe tactical rigidity.
Yeah, which makes me wonder, why did the Rajputs maintain this reliance on slow elephants and immovable forts when they were faced with the highly mobile Turkic horse archers of Muhammad of Ghor in the late 12th century?
It is a profound tension between deeply entrenched social structures and the tactical necessity of adaptation.
How so?
While the Rajputs were organized by decentralized clans, their warfare was deeply tied to concepts of personal honor, individual valor, and the frontal cavalry or elephant charge.
In stark contrast to the Ghurid armies.
Exactly. The Ghurid armies utilized Mamluks slave soldiers who were highly disciplined, professional mounted archers trained to fight as a cohesive, synchronized unit rather than as individuals seeking personal glory.
Then we see this fatal clash of doctrines at the battles of Touraine. In the first battle, in 1191, the sheer mass of the Rajput Confederacy, commanding over 100,000 troops, physically overwhelmed and routed the Ghurids.
The Rajput frontal charge succeeded, but Muhammad of Ghor analyzed his defeat and adapted.
He returned in 1192 with a strategy designed specifically to exploit Rajput's psychological and tactical rigidity.
Yes, he refused to engage in a traditional, honorable, pitched battle. Instead, he initiated dawn attacks to disrupt their camp,
And he deployed his mounted archers in independent divisions.
to shower the slow-moving Rajput formations with arrows from a safe distance, refusing to close into melee combat.
And then he ordered a feigned retreat.
The feigned retreat is one of the most difficult maneuvers to execute in ancient warfare.
Because you have to convince the enemy you are breaking and fleeing in panic without actually losing unit cohesion.
Right. When the Ghurid center pretended to flee, the Rajputs, driven by the clan culture of pursuing a defeated enemy for honor, broke their own tightly packed defensive formations and charged forward.
They rushed straight into a pre-planned ambush.
The Ghurid flanking cavalry wheeled around and encircled the now disorganized Rajput infantry. The Ghurid mobility completely dismantled the traditional static and shock-heavy Rajput tactics.
While the northern plains are dealing with these massive land invasions and the clash of cavalry doctrines, something entirely different is happening in the deep south.
Yes, the Chola dynasty is executing an unprecedented maritime expansion.
Right. In 1025, Rajendra I launched a massive naval expedition across the Bay of Bengal, targeting the Srivijaya Empire in modern-day Southeast Asia.
And the logistical complexity of this blue water projection is staggering. The Bay of Bengal is not a calm inland sea.
No, it is not.
The Chola Navy had to utilize a deep, multi-generational understanding of the seasonal monsoons. They used the southwest monsoon winds to push their fleets towards Sumatra and the Malay Peninsula.
And they operated from highly developed naval bases like Nagapattinam, which required deep water anchorage, shipbuilding yards, and massive timber supply chains.
The ships themselves were marvels of engineering. They didn't just use standard coastal fishing vessels.
No, they built a combination of specialized oared warships, designed for rapid maneuverability during naval combat, and massive transport vessels capable of deploying thousands of heavy infantry, horses, and supplies across 2,000 kilometers of open ocean.
They used sewn plank construction, where the wooden planks of the hull are stitched together with coconut coir ropes.
Which allows the hull to flex and absorb the impact of rough ocean swells without shattering.
Exactly. When the Chola fleet arrived, they executed a highly coordinated amphibious assault. They sacked 14 key polities of the Srivijaya Empire, including Palembang and Kedaram.
So the natural assumption is that they were trying to build a permanent overseas territorial empire, like the British or Spanish did centuries later.
But they were not. This is a critical distinction in pre-colonial Asian warfare. This was not about territorial annexation.
It was an aggressive, surgical, commercial strategy.
Right. The Srivijaya Empire controlled the Strait of Malacca. They were monopolizing the incredibly lucrative maritime trade routes flowing between India, the Middle East, and Tang Dynasty China.
So Rasendra I used his navy to physically smash those trade monopolies.
He extracted tribute, destroyed the Srivijaya naval capacity, and forced international commerce to redirect through Chola-controlled ports on the Indian coast.
It showcases an advanced understanding of economic warfare using naval power to secure commercial dominance without taking on the unsustainable permanent logistical burden of occupying distant lands.
Now, the established rules of warfare, whether Rajput hill forts or Chola naval dominance, are violently disrupted between 1526 and the 1750s.
Because of the introduction of gunpowder.
Yes. It triggers a radical shift in both imperial campaigns and asymmetric guerrilla warfare. It starts at the First Battle of Panipat on April 21st, 1526.
Babur arrives from Central Asia with roughly 12,000 troops. He is facing the Sultan of Delhi, Ibrahim Lodi, who commands an army of 100,000 men and hundreds of heavy war elephants.
On paper, a force of 12,000 facing 100,000 should be annihilated before noon.
Yeah, that is a massive disadvantage.
But Babur brought a military revolution to the subcontinent. He understood that mass infantry could be neutralized by firepower, and that massive numbers could be constricted by battlefield engineering.
He utilized a tactic called the tuluma, right?
Yes, he anchored his right flank against the town of Panipat, and on his left flank, he dug trenches filled with tree branches.
Which forced Lodi's massive army into a narrow frontal corridor.
And then Babur deployed his secret weapon, the wagon barricade. He tied roughly 700 baggage wagons together with hide ropes to form a physical defensive wall across his center.
And behind this wall, he positioned his matchlock musketeers and field cannons.
The matchlock represents a profound shift in infantry lethality. Unlike a bow, which requires years of physical training to draw heavy tension, a matchlock can be operated by a relatively lightly trained soldier.
It uses a slow-burning match to ignite a gunpowder charge, propelling a lead ball with enough kinetic force to penetrate armor.
When Lodi's massive army, spearheaded by the war elephants, charged into the narrow corridor, they hit this wagon barricade.
And by 9 o'clock in the morning, the elephants were met with sustained, concentrated artillery and musket fire.
It wasn't just the physical impact of the lead balls and cannon shot. It was the sensory overload.
The deafening noise of the cannons, the blinding flashes, and the thick, sulfurous smoke completely shattered the elephants' discipline.
The panicked beasts turned around and violently trampled through Lodi's own tightly packed infantry lines.
While the center was trapped and being torn apart by their own elephants and Babur's artillery, Babur utilized the rapid flanking maneuvers of his mounted archers to completely encircle the disorganized force.
Firepower and strict unit discipline entirely negated a massive numerical advantage. This technological superiority became the foundation of the Mughal Empire.
Babur's grandson, Akbar, scaled this gunpowder revolution dramatically. He applied it directly to the problem of the Rajput hill forts.
During his grueling sieges of massive fortresses like Chittor in 1568 and later Ranthambore, Akbar didn't bother starving them out over several years.
No, he utilized massive artillery trains, casting huge bronze cannons on site. More importantly, he deployed highly trained teams of sappers.
The sappers would construct covered trenches, called sabots, to approach the base of the fort walls while protected from defensive arrow fire.
And once at the base, they meticulously dug tunnels deep into the rock under the stone foundations.
They packed these tunnels with massive quantities of gunpowder mines. When detonated, the focused explosive force would physically breach the ancient stone walls,
creating a ramp of rubble for the Mughal heavy infantry to charge through. The static hill forts that had protected the Rajputs for centuries were suddenly obsolete in the face of industrial-scale explosive breaching.
The Mughal war machine seemed unstoppable. But they eventually met their match, and it wasn't through better cannons.
No, it was through a complete paradigm shift in the south, the Maratha counter-revolution. Shivaji Bhosle developed a comprehensive system of guerrilla warfare known as Ganimikava.
He understood the mechanics of the Mughal army. He knew that facing their heavily armored cavalry and massive artillery trains in a pitched battle on open plains was suicide.
So he changed the theater of war. He leveraged the rugged, mountainous, and heavily forested terrain of the Western Ghats.
Shivaji's entire strategic doctrine was built on extreme mobility, surprise ambushes, and avoiding direct, prolonged confrontation.
His soldiers traveled light, carrying minimal rations, and relied on the local terrain for sustenance, completely eliminating the slow, vulnerable baggage trains that burdened the Mughals.
There is a specific narrative vignette that perfectly captures the psychological and tactical brilliance of Shivaji's approach. In 1659, at the Battle of Pratapgarh, the Bijapur Sultanate sent a massive, heavily armed force of 10,000 men.
Under the command of General Afzal Khan to crush Shivaji's rebellion.
Right. Shivaji knew his lightly armed infantry could not defeat Afzal Khan's heavy cavalry in a frontal assault, so he utilized diplomacy as a weapon of war.
He lured Afzal Khan into a parley, a face-to-face diplomatic meeting at the base of the fort, ostensibly to negotiate a surrender.
The agreement was that both men would attend lightly armed, with only a few bodyguards, but Shivaji prepared for an assassination.
He wore chainmail hidden beneath his clothing, and inside his closed hand he concealed a weapon specifically designed for close-quarter surprise attacks, the baknak or tiger claws.
This is a metal weapon with curved blades designed to fit over the knuckles or conceal within the palm.
During the traditional embrace of greeting, Afzal Khan attempted to physically overpower and strangle Shivaji.
But the hidden chainmail deflected Afzal Khan's dagger strike. Shivaji immediately used the tiger claws to disembowel the general.
This targeted assassination was not just a desperate struggle, it was the predetermined signal for a massive ambush.
The moment Afzal Khan fell, Maratha troops hiding in the dense surrounding forests launched a coordinated assault.
The Bijapuri army, suddenly leaderless and trapped in the narrow forest paths where their cavalry could not maneuver, was completely routed with minimal Maratha casualties.
This wasn't just a clever trick, it was the birth of a systemic shift in how warfare was conducted.
By the time we reached the administration of the Peshwa Bajirao I in the early 18th century, this guerrilla foundation had evolved into swift, strategic light cavalry maneuvers on a massive scale.
Baji Rao perfected the art of operational mobility. The Maratha light cavalry would conduct forced marches over incredible distances, covering 50 miles or more in a single day.
In the Battle of Palkh in 1728, Bajirao faced a much larger, heavily armored combined army of the Mughals and the Nizam of Hyderabad.
He never gave them a pitched battle. Instead, he continuously outflanked them. He used his mobility to sever their slow-moving supply lines.
He poisoned the local water sources ahead of their march and burned the forage.
He simply starved the massive, lumbering Mughal war machine into a humiliating surrender. The heavy artillery and armored cavalry of the Mughals could not fight an enemy they could not catch.
The Marathas didn't just innovate in the mountains, they applied this exact same philosophy of asymmetric warfare to the ocean.
Which brings us to the Maratha Navy, specifically under the command of Sarkar or Admiral Kanhoji Angry.
He recognized the threat of European maritime powers, the Portuguese, the Dutch, and the heavily armed ships of the British East India Company.
Anger understood naval mechanics. The European galleons and heavily armed East Indiamen were deep draft vessels. They carried dozens of heavy bronze cannons along their broadsides.
In the deep, open ocean where they could catch the wind and line up a broadside barrage, they were invincible.
So Angry built a green water navy. A green water navy operates strictly in the shallow, jagged coastal regions, bays, and river estuaries.
Think of it like a lightweight, highly agile wrestler forcing a massive heavyweight boxer to fight inside a tiny, cramped closet. The heavyweight has knockout power, but they physically do not have the room to swing their arms.
Angry dictated the theater of engagement. He forced the massive European ships to navigate the treacherous, shallow waters of the Konkan coast.
His tactical execution was flawless. He utilized ships called grabs, which were up to 400 tons and carried a few forward-facing cannons.
Then smaller, highly maneuverable galavats under 120 tons. Because these vessels had shallow drafts and were equipped with oars, they could operate completely independently of the wind.
When a massive European ship entered coastal waters, Angre's fleets would row out. They would deliberately attack from the leeward side or from the astern, the very back of the ship.
By attacking from the rear, the European ships were completely neutralized. They could not turn their massive broadside guns to bear on the nimble Maratha ships.
Angre's forces would bombard the rudder, disable the steering, and then launch boarding parties.
Kanhoji Angre was never defeated in a naval battle by the combined European powers. He effectively established an independent sphere of indigenous maritime influence,
levying taxes on European merchant shipping and proving that localized tactical innovation could completely dismantle European naval superiority if the environment was manipulated correctly.
While the Marathas were dismantling imperial authority in the south and at sea, another profound martial shift was occurring in the northern Punjab region.
With the formation of the Sikh Khalsa.
In 1699, facing severe religious persecution and the execution of the ninth Guru by the Mughal authorities, Guru Gobind Singh took a radical structural step.
On the day of Vaisakhi, he institutionalized the Khalsa. He transformed his followers into Sansapati saint soldiers.
The Khalsa is a brilliant study in the sociology of warfare. Historically, Indian armies were frequently fractured by strict caste hierarchies.
Right. A commander might have Rajput cavalry, Muslim mercenaries, and lower caste infantry, all eating separately and operating under different social codes.
Guru Gobind Singh deliberately erased these caste divisions among his followers. He instituted a ceremony where all initiates drank from the same bowl, creating a deeply egalitarian and unified fighting force.
This shared identity, marked by physical symbols of martial readiness like the kirpa and dagger, created unbreakable unit cohesion.
Militarily, they pooled their resources and engaged in highly effective guerrilla operations against the entrenched Mughal governors.
This egalitarian military structure allowed them to survive decades of brutal imperial campaigns, eventually coalescing into the powerful, heavily modernized Sikh Empire under Ranjit Singh.
And the fragmentation of the Mughal Empire under the pressure of Maratha and Sikh rebellions coincides perfectly with the arrival of European trading companies.
Which brings us to the corporate conquest, spanning the European encounters up to the year 1858. These companies underwent a bizarre metamorphosis.
Transforming from merchants seeking spices into entities fielding the largest standing armies in the region.
The early European encounters were strictly maritime and coastal. The Portuguese used superior naval artillery to secure coastal enclaves like Diu in 1509.
The Dutch attempted to expand their military presence inland, but were decisively defeated by the forces of the Kingdom of Travancore at the Battle of Colonial in 1741.
That defeat confined the Dutch strictly to trading posts. But the British East India Company took a fundamentally different approach.
Very different.
Wait, I really need to stop and look at the sheer logistical insanity of the British East India Company for a second.
Yeah, it's quite something.
We are talking about a joint stock corporation, a private company with shareholders meeting in Leadenhall Street in London, concerned about stock prices and quarterly profits. And somehow this corporation ends up fielding a private mercenary army of 260,000 men.
Right.
How does a corporation finance the conquest of a subcontinent? Where is the money for hundreds of thousands of muskets coming from?
The East India Company's success was not primarily driven by technological superiority. It was driven by an innovative and ruthless financial and organizational formula.
They did not ship 260,000 British soldiers from London.
No. They utilized sepoys, local Indian recruits. The critical difference was training. The EIC trained these sepoys in highly disciplined, European-style linear infantry tactics.
Let's explain those linear tactics. In previous eras, Indian infantry often fought as massive, loosely organized crowds, relying on individual melee combat.
The EIC trained their sepoys to stand shoulder to shoulder in strict lines, 3 ranks deep.
Yeah.
They used the flintlock musket and the socket bayonet.
The first rank fires, the second rank steps up and fires while the first reloads, and the third rank fires. It creates a continuous rolling wall of lead.
And if cavalry charges, they form an infantry square, a dense box of men with bayonets pointing outward, creating an impenetrable hedge of steel. Horses will not charge into a solid wall of bayonets.
Exactly. This discipline won the Battle of Plassey in 1757 and the far more decisive Battle of Buxar in 1764.
Where relatively small company forces defeated massive Indian coalitions. But to answer your question about finance, after winning Buxar, the EIC secured the Diwani.
The right to collect tax revenues directly from the wealthy province of Bengal.
They essentially hijacked the existing Mughal tax infrastructure. They took the massive agricultural wealth of Bengal and poured it directly into recruiting more Indian sepoys.
So the conquest became self-financing.
Yes. Indian tax money paid for Indian soldiers to conquer more Indian territory for a corporation in London.
But the indigenous powers fiercely resisted this corporate expansion with heavy modernization. Look at the Anglo-Mysore Wars against Hyder Ali and his son Tipu Sultan.
In the Battle of Polalur in 1780, the British suffered one of their most devastating defeats in India.
And they lost because Mysore unleashed a weapon the British had never seen deployed with such devastating efficiency: iron-cased rocket artillery.
Previous rockets in warfare used paper or bamboo casings, which limited the amount of gunpowder they could hold and therefore limited their range and explosive yield.
Mysore metallurgists utilized high-quality iron tubes to hold the propellant charge. This iron casing allowed for much higher internal pressure before bursting.
The mechanics meant these rockets had an effective range of up to 2 kilometers. Furthermore, they were often fitted with sharpened bamboo poles or metal blades.
I mean, just picture standing in a rigid, disciplined British linear formation. Suddenly, a volley of hundreds of iron rockets comes screaming through the air, completely erratic, showering sparks.
When they hit the ground, they don't just explode, they ricochet and tear through the densely packed ranks.
The sheer kinetic impact and psychological terror severely disrupted the disciplined British formations, completely breaking their tactical cohesion.
Mysore effectively hybridized European-style infantry drill with indigenous technological innovation.
The British eventually overwhelmed Mysore, but it required massive coalitions with the Marathas and the Nizam of Hyderabad and decades of attrition.
The impact of those iron-cased rockets was so profound that the British captured them, reverse-engineered the mechanics, and developed the Congreve rockets.
Which the British military later used heavily in the Napoleonic Wars and the War of 1812 in North America.
We see similarly fierce resistance in the later Anglo-Maratha Wars, though the Marathas were heavily defeated at battles like Assaye in 1803 by Arthur Wellesley, the future Duke of Wellington.
But the most tragic resistance came during the Anglo-Sikh Wars.
The Sikh Khalsa army had built a highly modernized, incredibly lethal military machine. They hired French and Italian mercenaries, veterans of Napoleon's army, to train their infantry and artillery corps.
Their artillery matched, and some battles exceeded the quality and firing rate of the British guns.
Yet they lost. During the incredibly bloody battles of Sobraon in 1846 and Chillianwalla in 1849, the Sikh soldiers fought with devastating effectiveness.
But the structural command broke down.
The soldiers were betrayed by internal court intrigues in Lahore. Commanders deliberately withheld reinforcements or abandoned the field due to political rivalries.
The soldiers fought brilliantly on the tactical level, but the political collapse at the strategic level doomed the Sikh Empire to British annexation.
Which leads us directly to the structural breaking point of the entire corporate military system, the Indian Rebellion of 1857.
The immediate spark is famous. The British introduced the new pattern 1853 Enfield rifled musket.
The soldiers had to bite the end off the paper cartridge to load the gunpowder.
Rumors spread rapidly that these cartridges were greased with a mixture of beef tallow and pork lard. This deeply offended the strict religious sensibilities of both Hindu and Muslim sepoys, leading directly to the mutiny of the Bengal Army in Meerut on May 10, 1857.
Right, but an entire subcontinent does not erupt in massive, sustained warfare for a year just because of cartridge grease. We have to look at the structural mechanics of the military.
There were deep, systemic grievances built into the EIC's army.
The structural causes were heavily tied to sociology and economics. The Bengal Army, which was the largest of the three company armies, relied heavily on recruiting high-caste Hindu sepoys, particularly from regions like Awadh.
When the British controversially annexed Awadh in 1856, many of these sepoys felt a profound loss of their traditional social standing and land rights.
Furthermore, there were massive institutionalized pay disparities. An Indian infantryman was paid a fraction of what a European soldier received.
And Indian soldiers were structurally barred from rising to the highest officer ranks, regardless of their experience or competence.
The rebellion rapidly escalated from a military mutiny into a massive civilian uprising across northern and central India.
It resulted in brutal, high-casualty siege warfare at places like Kanpur and Lucknow, where the mechanics of urban combat and artillery bombardment leveled entire cities.
The suppression of the rebellion was equally brutal and systematic. The British utilized reinforcements diverted from other global conflicts.
And crucially, they relied heavily on loyal Indian contingents from the newly conquered Punjab region, utilizing the existing geopolitical rivalries to their advantage.
The aftermath of 1857 fundamentally rewrites the military and political landscape forever.
The British government passes the Government of India Act of 1858. The East India Company is entirely dissolved. The Crown takes direct, formal control of the subcontinent.
And they entirely restructure the military apparatus to prevent another uprising. They adopted the martial races theory, deliberately mixing ethnic groups within regiments to prevent any single caste or regional identity from dominating and organizing a mutiny.
They significantly increased the ratio of European troops to Indian sepoys.
Most critically, they completely restricted Indian access to heavy field artillery. For nearly a century, the artillery corps would remain almost exclusively in European hands.
It effectively ends the era of independent Indian military evolution.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to consider. Throughout thousands of years, the Indian subcontinent functioned as an immense, volatile laboratory for warfare.
Invaders frequently arrived with superior technology, whether it was the iron weapons of the Mahajanapadas, the Central Asian horse archers of the Scythians, or the matchlock gunpowder of the Mughals.
But those external forces were consistently absorbed and altered by the reality of the subcontinent. The military history of pre-colonial India is not a story of static isolation or linear European progress. It is a story of profound, continuous synthesis.
The environment forced the Maurya to build unprecedented logistical bureaucracies.
The coastal geography forced Kanaji Ungar to invent brilliant asymmetric naval tactics. And the iron-cased rockets developed by the metallurgical engineers of Mysore eventually influenced the artillery used in massive European wars.
The tactical innovations born on the Indian subcontinent ultimately echoed across global battlefields long after the empires that built them had collapsed into dust.
A legacy of adaptation, engineering, and influence that reaches far beyond the borders of the subcontinent.
That wraps up our deep dive into this era. Thank you for listening. History Maps. Learn history visually.